unless y'all want to hold off a few more minutes, 30, 40 minutes. It's good to have all of you here tonight. For those who might not know who I am, my name is Billy Faulkner. Jeremiah, our beloved pastor, went on his trip. He kind of neglected to tell me that he didn't have anybody, to do Wednesday nights. Well, it's kind of hard to get somebody for Wednesday night on Sunday afternoon or Monday morning at crack of dawn. So here we are. So I will do my best. I'm going to tell you like he does, fact check me. If I say something you disagree with or you don't think is right, go through that Bible, raise your hand. But I won't be embarrassed. I may not answer your question right then, but I won't be embarrassed. To get started, Darrell, how about open us in a word of prayer?
Father, we kind of privileged to be in your house tonight. Father, we do lift up Billy as he brings lesson to us tonight. We just pray for your share over him and the message that he has, that you would open our minds, that we would learn something new from your word, that we can hide in our hearts and apply to our lives. Father, again, we just thank you for the place that you have given us. We do lift up Jeremiah as he is on mission trip into Africa. Father, we just pray that you keep him safe and return him safely here. Father, as we go through the events of this day, we just pray that all we say and do in this place is honoring and pleasing to you and in your will. It's in Jesus' name that I pray. Amen.
Thank you. I had thought about a couple of things, but I got to think about when we were in school. When you were in high school, everybody had a subject they thought they were pretty good at. Well, they thought they were. It took me a while to figure out which one I was good at, but I found out that I liked history. Kind of odd, but I like history. I like digging into things a little bit, checking things out, seeing what's there. So, and I've always liked David, King David. Now, King David is a very unique person. And there's enough in the Bible, if you look at 1st and 2nd Samuel, Psalms, you can write several books on him. And I'm sure there's been numerous books written about him. But I got to think, I wanted to dig into a couple things that maybe, you've heard or may not heard, and then tie it into something that I think really strikes home for not only David, but it applies to us. So I put down some things and did a little digging. Of course, David was from the tribe of Judah. Now, who was his mom and dad? Jesse was the father. Who was the mother? One of those little things you probably wouldn't know because it's not a whole lot mentioned in the Bible about Jesse's wife, David's mother. If I can pronounce this, it's Netzaveh Atbat Adi. That's probably why she's not mentioned a whole lot in the Bible. But it's interesting because if you go back and look at history, there always seems to be a dark spot in somebody's life way back somewhere. You dig deep enough, you can usually find something. Well, there was a little dark spot in the life, not necessarily Jesse's, but it goes back to Boaz and Ruth, comes down through Obed and his family. She was actually considered a harlot. Now, I'm not going into what did. I'm not I believe the word is an eschatologist or whatever, but it goes back to how, whether you were considered a pure Israelite or if you were not. Well, if you go back to Boaz and Ruth, she's a Moabite. So from there, you can understand when you come down through lineage and you want a pure, I used the word race, but that's the only thing that comes to mind, you don't have it when you get to Jesse, his wife, and David. I never said that. So that kind of throws him out there as a black sheep, kind of like Joseph. You know, and not that he had that family, but he was looked at as a black sheep because of this blight. He was the seventh or eighth of sons in the family, depending on whether you counted him as number 7 or he was counted as number 8 because of the family ties. He's born in Bethlehem, where everybody knows Bethlehem was birthplace of Christ. But as this writer says in Luke 2:4, it refers to it as the town of David. And that's what Samuel anointed David to be king. He anointed David at an early age. And you ask, somewhere in here, usually someone that's God has put his hand on has upbringing by somebody. I don't see anything in Scripture that actually pinpoints who gave him his early training as to who God is and what his life and what his plan for his life was supposed to be. Samuel, I think, had a big part to do in it because he was, the prophet at that time. And I'm sure his mother, even though there was some disconnect between the family, I'm sure she taught him a lot of what he needed to know. But why did God choose David? You've heard the word that David was like a man after God's own heart. Why? He obeyed. The one thing that comes in that I keep seeing in here is he obeyed God. Plain and simple. He obeyed. That was the connection with the phrase in David and his connection to God is he obeyed God. As we all know, when he was growing up, he was a shepherd. Well, shepherds back then spent a lot of time away from home, and when you read into some of the history of the shepherds and David and his family, his brothers actually wanted him gone. Shepherds were supposed to take care of the sheep and fight off lions and bears, which David did. It's recorded that he did do that. But his brothers, didn't want him home. They just soon a bear or a lion eat him because they considered him an outcast. Treated kind of like Joseph. Remember Joseph's brothers. Don't have anything to do with him. Threw him in a pit, sent his coat back, dipped in, sheep blood or whatever. David also had a knack for music. As you know, he wrote, I think, 60-some psalms in the book of Psalms. Now, consider him as a shepherd out away from home all the time. How do you occupy yourself? Throwing rocks, hoping a bear comes up so you can test how good you are. He developed a knack with music. Now, whether it was a harp or a flute, I don't know. It could have been both. Could have been both. As he was growing up, about the time that the Israelites, wanted a king. So the process went through. You all know the story that Samuel came in. He anointed him because the people had to have a king and be like every other sinful nation in that region. So what happened? There became a connection between Saul and David. Kind of an odd connection in that when he first met him, he was told by one of his servants that he knew somebody who played music and it might help him with his feeling bad. Well, if you read the history of Saul and feeling bad, the Spirit of God left him. An evil spirit entered him. After a while, he had been king, and it was tormenting him. David would come in, play for him, soothe him, and make him feel better. But it got to be where he wanted David to stay all the time and not be able to tend to his sheep, because that tugged on, I'm sure that tugged on, David's heart a little bit. Well, he got a bigger connection with Saul. Saul then, actually went out and he wanted him to be his armor bearer, as well as his mind specialist, I guess you would call it. So he could be there all the time with him. Well, time went on. David got a little bigger, a little stronger. He was still a shepherd. Even though he would go out with Saul and come back, he was still a shepherd. We get to the next part in the story, and David becomes a giant slayer. We know the story of Goliath. The Philistines were encamped, and the Israelites were encamped, in front. They were looking at each other, and this humongous 9.2 inch, whatever he was, big, was taunting the Israelites. Come out. Don't you have anybody who wants to fight? Nobody wanted to fight. Not even Saul, and he was not a small person. Nobody wanted to come out and take up for the Israelites, or take up for God, basically, because he was putting out all kinds of insults against that God. He was cursing God. But they were not willing to do anything. Well, David had been out tending the sheep. His father had called for him, and he said they had fixed a goodie bag for his brothers. So he said, "Here, David, take this to your brothers. They're up there on the battle lines. They need provisions." So he goes, he takes everything. He hears all this ruckus going on. What in the world? You're going to sit there and let this man talk to you and talk about our God that way? Curse him in that fashion? Long story short, David said, "I'll take care of him." He didn't need the heavy armor and everything they were trying to put on him. He said, "No, I'll take care of this." So he goes up with the slingshot and the rocks. And we know what happens to the Goliath. Well, from then on, David kind of becomes a part of the Saul regiment. He fights many battles. You heard in the Psalms where it says, Saul and his thousands and David and his 10,000s. That wasn't exactly what Saul wanted to hear, coming from this upstart. Well, that got a little worse, and it became a fraction between those two. And we know down the road, it came to the point that Saul tried to kill David. We know about Jonathan, who was Saul's son. He loved David. As a Christian brother, or as a brother, he loved him. So he helped him all along. David was also Israel's greatest king. But with the death of Saul, he had to work extra hard to pull the nation together. Judah wanted him as king. The other part of Israel wanted Abner. And here comes another one of those names. Ishbosheth to be king. Because that's who they served under. They were Saul's people. It took years for them to come together and get this worked out. Now, how long have we as people been trying to work certain things out? We look at the Bible sometimes and say, you can't relate this to what's going on today. You can't relate any of this to how I feel or what I'm doing. It is as pertinent today as it was in David's term in the year 1000 BC. It's no different. It's all the same problem. It's a matter of finding the common answer, which is God's word. We come to another point in David's life when he has been actually anointed king. He's got things worked out with everybody. He's done a great job of surrounding, getting security for his people, providing for his people. And so rather than going to battle, this time they were battling with the Philistines again, he decided to stay home. That was the first big mistake. The king always went with the army. Now, he may not have fought hand in hand like his generals and his people did, but he went. In David's case, he would be in the midst of it 90% of the time. While at home, on his roof, he was walking around. You wonder why was he up walking around on the roof unless he felt bad about not being out with his troops and doing what he was supposed to be doing. But he spied this beautiful woman bathing on the roof down below. Bathsheba, one of his top generals, Uriah's wife. We all know the story. He sent his servants to get her, bring her to him. They had a relationship. She was pregnant. He knew what he did was wrong. You can't tell me a person of his stature, a person knowing God as he did, that what he was doing was not wrong. So why did he do it? Don't know. One writer said it was a pure test of God as to how good a person he really was. Or one says it was the test that the devil used to test God. Makes no difference. It created a mess for David and the Israelite nation. In an effort to work his way out of this, David sent for Uriah to come home. He came home. David, they feasted. He said, now I want you to go spend the night with your wife and enjoy a couple of days away from the war. If you knew anything about Uriah, he was top-notch military. He wasn't going to come home and enjoy the benefits of being at home and his soldiers be warring against the Philistines. So he went, he ate, he had a good time. He went home, he slept outside. He didn't go in the house. The next day, David asked, how did you sleep? Was everything good? No, I didn't go in the house. So he tried again, gave him another day. He said, take off a couple of days. He said, relax. Enjoy this time away from the conflict. Would not do it. So, David says, I got to fix this mess. So he plans a way to have him killed. You can put it any way you want to, plain and simple. He had Uriah murdered. He told the top general, he said, take him and part of his men and send them to the very front line, knowing that it was a 99 and 9/10 chance that he would not survive. And he didn't. Didn't survive. You question, or I question, would not your army think something out of the ordinary for you to do something like that? Would they not question the man who ordered this? Would you not think, just stop for a second and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? But it was over. Uriah was dead. There was a time of mourning. David took her in. And you know how the story goes, they were married. As I said, David he actually broke 2 commandments. The 7th commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. The sixth one, thou shalt not kill. Plain to say, he had done both. No doubt about it. After this was over, it said that David said nothing. He did nothing. His health started to go. He wouldn't see people. That doesn't surprise me when you have sit there and violated every kind of trust in the world that you promised, and even to God. You know he had to be tormented day and night. I remember, I can laugh now, but it won't funny when it happened. My brother and I, we were playing on the back of a grain truck, and my older sister wanted to climb up. And we told her, no, you can't climb up. This boys on this stuff. You just stay out. Well, she didn't like it, so she went around, climbed up on the fender, got up on the truck. Well, if you know anything about bagging wheat, sacks are kind of slick. When she came around the corner, she fell off the truck. Cracked her head, had to have about 4 or 5 stitches in it. My mom and dad had been somewhere to a meeting or something. They got back, and of course we had promised her everything in the world, not to tell. We'll don't, just don't. Well, Mom and Dad got home, and first thing, bam, right through the door. Mom and Daddy, I was playing out there, and Billy and Danny, they just pushed me off the truck. Well, it wasn't quite that bad. We didn't pull the hand up, but we didn't keep her from falling either. So my daddy had a way of saying, I'll talk to you later. Lord have mercy, don't tell me you're going to talk to me later, the way we got punished in the good old days. So we waited about 3 days. Well, we actually thought, well, he's forgot this. We're home free. That's not going to be nothing to this. No. About 4 o'clock that afternoon, when we come in to, tend to the cows, milk cows and stuff, Daddy walks out from under the barn shed with a little plow line. It had about 2 inches of tobacco gum on it. And he says, who wants to go first? I'll do it. Get it over with. But you felt bad. I felt bad because I knew what was coming. Now this just didn't go on for a day or two. Think now, she's pregnant. Pregnancy lasts, 9 months plus or minus. So he's dealing with this every day for that period of time. Everybody knows something's out of kilter because he's not performing the way he's supposed to. I would bet you he doesn't have the relationship with God he had. I bet he hadn't prayed as he should, if at all. So this goes on for a while, and I think God did it intentionally before he sent Nathan to give David a chance to come to him, and David wouldn't do it or couldn't do it. So Nathan shows up with the pretense that he had to see David because he had an important meeting. He had to discuss some stuff. So he goes in. Without a whole lot being said, he goes into a story with David. He tells David about 2 men. One man, very rich, had all kinds of livestock and animals. One man had one little sheep, one little lamb. That lamb was like a family member. It ate with him. It played with his daughter. Slept in the house with them. They loved that little lamb. Well, this rich gentleman had somebody coming in for a day or two to stay. So rather than pick one of his animals, he went out and took this person's little lamb. Used it for the purpose of having his party. When Nathan told that to David, David, as the saying goes, just went off. He said, tell me who it is. He will be killed. I will restore fourfold to that family for what he has done. Now put yourself in David's place for a minute. He's standing mad as fire. And Nathan says, Otha, you are that person. I would imagine David went white as a sheet at that point. But then Dr. McGee, I like his commentaries. He said, have you ever thought when he told him that David had three options? Not me, I didn't do it. Could have been one of my military people, but I didn't do it. Nathan, you are totally wrong to accuse me of that. Or he could have simply took his scepter and said, goodbye, you're gone. But he didn't do that. My whole point in getting here and talking about David and putting us in here on occasion as part of it, I often hear people say, there's nowhere for me to go at this point in my life. I've done too many bad things. It's too late for me to ask forgiveness. It's too late for me to start over and try anything again. God won't forgive me for what I have done. My answer is, have you asked him? Psalms 51. I'm like Jeremiah. I'll read this and I'm through, I promise. O loving and kind God, have mercy. Have pity upon me and take away the awful stain of my transgressions. O wash me, cleanse me from this guilt. Let me be pure again, for I admit my shameful deed. It haunts me day and night. It is against you and you alone I have sinned and did this terrible thing. You saw it all, and your sentence against me is just. But I was born a sinner. Yes, from the moment my mother conceived me. We go back to that one infraction in the family history that he makes reference to. Say, you deserve honesty from the heart. Yes, utter sincerity and truthfulness. Oh, give me this wisdom. And he says that then, when my heart is right, then you will rejoice in the good that I do and in the offerings I bring to sacrifice upon your altar. Dr. McGee made the statement, thank God there is forgiveness with him. But we need, and there needs to be confession on our part for that forgiveness. So as I said, I went through all this with David to give you a little insight about his upbringing and what he's done, how good a person. And if you go on and read through David, I didn't even touch on the things he has done and the good things. And not all good. Now, he still had to answer. God forgave him. But we still have to be taken to the woodshed for what we've done. But I ask, is there anything so bad you can't come to the Lord, no matter how sorry a thing it was or how long you have held on to it, and not ask for forgiveness and be accepted? That's all I have. Does anybody have anything they'd like to add? Any comments? Thank you. Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing about David. When you look at him, and particularly when God said he's a man after my own heart, how good does it get for him? But then it also shows that he's human. Regardless of how good we are or we think we are human. We're going to fall. We're going to fail. But as Psalm 51 says, you know, come to me and confess, and I will forgive you. And I bring that, you know, like I said, I've heard a lot of people just say, you know, just not going to do it. You're not going to forgive me. No such thing if you come in honest repentance and ask God to forgive you and change your life.
Really, I think too, a lot of times we let pride get in the way. I'm sure David was sitting there going, hey, I'm king.
Yeah.
What people would think here if I stoop down and admit that, and I think we do that a lot of times.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when we really need to just confess it and not worry about what people think.
And I think if you're honest with yourself, there's been, as well as I know I have done some things that have haunted me, and I said, you know, I can deal with this, no big deal, you know, but you can't do it. If you're a true Christian, it will haunt you to the point where you become sick and don't function because your life is not in God's order. We have to remember that. Anybody else? Anything? How about this? The prayer list. Anyone got anybody?